Welcome back to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University. I'm pleased today to be interviewing a friend and colleague here in our community, a high-profile elected official, just recently re-elected, the Honorable Bam Carney, 51st District State Representative. Representative, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Congratulations on winning your, what term is this?
This will be my sixth term. So
sixth term.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to serve the people of the 51st District, and thank those for their support, and looking forward to another chance to serve them for 2 more years.
What would you consider, you've been in the legislature 10 years and we'll have 12 in by the end of your 6th term, a couple of the highlights of your time in the legislature?
Well, probably 2 of them would be obviously the 2 conference committees that I've served on for the budget negotiations.
Okay.
I mean, anytime you get that opportunity to be right there involved in that process, of course we only do a budget every 2 years here in Kentucky, so out of the 5 opportunities that I've been there, I've been on that twice. And then obviously the original conference committee my freshman year for Senate Bill 1, and that was as a freshman was a pretty good.
Now, remind our folks what Senate Bill 1 was.
Well, that was kind of some of the earlier version of some educational reform, particularly in terms of accountability and some things that's actually Senator David Williams championed a lot of. So, and that was, I guess, thinking back on the years, would have been about 2008, 9 year, and then obviously, recently the pension situation and trying to help resolve that situation.
Right. Now, just for our viewers and audience, a conference committee does what?
Well, a conference committee comes together when basically the House and Senate cannot come to an agreement on a particular bill that is passed through, and members are appointed by leadership at the time, and again, they happen on a lot of issues, more so than people probably think. Some of them are getting more profile attention, like the pension and issues and budgets, et cetera. But and then you'll have so many members of the majority caucus and so many of the minority caucus from the Senate and the House. They get kind of behind closed doors and just try to iron out any disagreements. And it's not necessarily party versus party as much. It's kind of chamber versus chamber a little bit.
Yeah.
And you're trying to work out an agreement that everybody can kind of.
How big is the budget of the Commonwealth?
The budget, the 2-year budget for the Commonwealth is about $21 billion right now, and it's kind of interesting. Actually, just this morning before I headed back to town, there were some projections for this budget that we might be about $25 million shortfall, which the consensus forecasting group, the lead economist, said that that's about a half a day's revenue in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we're really not too far off where we need to be. But that gives folks kind of an idea of kind of the money it takes to operate.
Yeah,
when 25 million.
And if you have a $25 million shortfall in revenue, that's far better than what it's been in years past.
Exactly. We've been running probably anywhere from 150 to 200 million, but right now it looks like it's about 25 million. And we actually think when everything's said and done, we may actually be to a little bit of a surplus or about even, which would be a great way to start things out.
Exactly. Now, you're just a few hours off of a big election within the Republican caucus. You were just elected to a new leadership position. Tell us about that. And I might add congratulations on that.
Well, thank you, sir. I was honored yesterday, actually. We had new leadership elections to be selected by my colleagues to be the new majority floor leader for the House Republican caucus. And it's a great opportunity. It's a humbling opportunity, one that has a lot of responsibility with it. So we don't take it lightly, but we're looking forward to that role and trying to see do the best job we can and do that and use it to benefit the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky, obviously, but hopefully certainly to benefit our region as well.
What does the majority floor leader do? What are your responsibilities in that regard?
Basically, control the flow of legislation on the floor. Majority floor leader will call what legislation is going to be heard that day, or so kind of in a position to keep anything from being heard or having anything heard. So that's the main role. There's a lot of other responsibilities, obviously, within the caucus in terms of. But I kind of described when I talked with my colleagues yesterday. I feel like my role would be one to help protect the caucus, make sure that lead from out front, not from the behind or anything, and then and put everybody in a position to succeed. And I feel like that's something I work a lot with. I think it comes from the days of coaching.
Right.
Trying to find people from sports. You try to put a player in a position where he or she can succeed, where their strengths are. And that's part of the role of any leadership member, but that's another role. We got 61 members now, so we came back with a supermajority, which was very significant for the climate that kind of had been out there the last several months. Right. And so trying to find 61 members, the right roles and places to be can be a little bit of a challenge.
Right. Now, as the majority floor leader, that puts you in the top tier of leadership in the House, Kentucky House of Representatives. Does it not?
That's correct.
Basically in the top three, top two,
three.
Basically.
So, yeah.
I know there's a Senate or a Speaker pro tem, but that position's generally taking nothing away from Mr. Meade, who's filling that role. But that role he does not take as much leadership role as the floor leader. Is that
that's
an accurate statement?
That's fair to say.
I mean, the Speaker does, of course.
Exactly.
Speaker Osborne.
And then, like I said, the Speaker would be obviously the number one leader there, and then most people would view probably floor leader and pro tem in a very similar role, but it carries a lot of responsibility with it. So.
Sure. And I can tell that you are humble by it and not, I don't sense any just absolute arrogance about it or any underestimation of what lies ahead in terms of the responsibility and the seriousness of it.
Well, again, we have so many challenges in the Commonwealth of Kentucky that it's a daunting task. Yeah. So extremely humbled by the opportunity. Looking forward to the challenge, because it is a significant challenge, but it's one with God's leadership. He'll guide us through.
Now, with this new leadership role, you still have other duties. You're still the 51st District representative, representing the people of the two counties, but you also have several committee assignments. Have those been put in place yet, or?
No, we're actually working on those as we speak. Some last night, today, and Monday, and then we'll have our retreat. Senate's having its retreat as we speak, and we'll have ours next Tuesday and Wednesday to start laying an agenda a little bit for this session, and those will be going out then. But generally, the rule of thumb is leadership. We really step back from. I currently serve on education as a chair, and in state government, and I've been on those state government since I've been there, but I'll be, as a leadership role, you step back, at most you'll serve on one committee because you spend so much time, and sometimes they choose not to serve on any because you have so many other responsibilities.
Very good. Now, as we're doing this interview, also we're still waiting on the outcome of the Kentucky Supreme Court. And just for a little bit background, the legislature passed, governor signed a pension reform bill, and it was challenged by the Attorney General and some other groups, interest groups. So it went to the circuit court. Circuit court ruled that it was procedurally unconstitutional, not substantively, but procedurally. And now it's before the Kentucky Supreme Court. What's that all about? When we say it's procedurally, or the court said it was procedurally, of course that's the argument. But what's the argument about?
Well, the argument is, any piece of legislation is supposed to have 3 full readings before it comes before the floor for a vote, et cetera. And basically the same process was used with this particular bill that has been used with many bills over the years. And that's really, I think, the pickle that the Supreme Court finds themselves in, is that while they may or may not agree with Judge Shepard's ruling that the procedure was not followed properly, if they agree with that, they're opening, for lack of a better term, Pandora's box for many challenges on bills that have been passed over the last 20 to 30, 40 years that basically were passed under the same process. And I think that's why they're being very deliberate. I'm frankly surprised they haven't made a ruling yet. They've actually ruled on some other significant issues just a couple weeks ago, and I think that's the situation they're in. They know that if they agree with his ruling, you're probably going to see lawyers lined up filing suits on the heroin bill that was passed just a couple years ago,
right,
because it was done the same process. CARA itself, original education reform, was done through the same reading process. So they're trying to, this is just me speculating, but I think they're trying to figure out how to deal with that issue that, you know, if they do agree with him, are we prepared for what's going to come after that? Because I can see a lot of challenges to a lot of decisions.
Essentially, as I understand, to kind of simplify it for our audience, the Constitution says there has to be three readings of the bill before it can be approved. And of course, the critics say it because it was an amended bill, and the amended, the original bill's readings were counted toward the three. They're arguing that does not meet the constitutional.
And again,
but it's been used, as you said, not just by Republicans.
It's been
you know, as long as the other party controlled, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, was used regularly.
That procedure has been used regularly. Again, I guess I'm not a lawyer, but many lawyers think that the ruling probably has some merit to it. But again, if you go on precedent, and
it's become a
common practice.
Exactly.
And again, that's the issue: is if you rule this one unconstitutional based on that process, you're really going to open the door for challenges on possibly hundreds of pieces.
And the net effect of a ruling that the court, aside from the challenges of prior laws that were passed the same way, the net result of a constitutional decision on this case, if they threw it out based on the procedure, would be you all would have to deal with the whole pension bill again.
That's correct.
Basically, would throw out what was done. Yet the court didn't say that anything you did was unconstitutional, right?
The court did not rule on anything.
Exactly.
Basically, Judge Shepard's ruling was purely unconstitutional based on procedural matters.
Right.
And again, that, you know, it's a delicate issue, because again, if they agree with his ruling, then the question is, do we go back and go through it again? And obviously, everybody in Kentucky knows it was a very controversial issue.
Right.
There's some members who are saying, well, you know, if that's the case, then just let it play out. Put as much money in as we can, let it play out. The only negative, there's a lot of negatives to that. One is this: if that occurs, our bond rating is going to be a huge risk. And so, because there is some sentiment just saying, well, you know, we tried to address the issue had been kicked down the road for 20, 30 years, and a lot of people weren't happy with it, so just kind of let it go. But that's not as simple as it sounds, because again, it would affect the bond rating of everything else in Kentucky. So this is much more than just pension issue.
Right.
It affects everything in state government, really, because you get into the bond rating, which affects obviously construction of highways, construction of a lot of other things that are needed. So this is a very complex issue that's not as simple as to whether a public employee is going to get their pension, et cetera. It's a very layered issue.
And the bill that was passed did not take away anyone's pension, correct?
Correct. No one's pension.
Didn't change anyone's pension.
If you're a retired employee, you had no changes. For teachers, if you're a current teacher like I am, the only change would have been, and it's not into effect now because it's in the courts.
Right.
Would have been the capping of sick days moving forward, where you couldn't use them to, for lack of a better term, spike your benefits, and then new hires would go into a hybrid cash balance system.
Which is what most people have now.
That's what most people have.
Some form have in private or other entities.
And in this plan here, you're guaranteed you can't lose. In the private industry, that's not a guarantee you have, but the state's going to make sure you don't lose money. So we feel like it was still an attractive plan. Now, would most people rather have what we've had? Sure. But the reality is that's not sustainable.
And I think your budget came closer to fully funding it than ever before.
Out of that 21 billion we just referenced for 2 years, 3.1 billion of it went to the pension system, and it calls for over 4 billion going in out of the next budget. So 4 billion of 21 already off the top for pensions only. That starts to affect many other programs that are vital to every Kentuckian.
Is there additional work, assuming, let's say the court upholds the law, the pension bill, and says it's okay? In other words, rules that the procedural process was okay. Additional measures that will have to be taken down the road, or will we be mainly will the debate be mainly the funding, coming up with sufficient revenue?
I think the debate shifts into mainly funding to make sure that we do, and part of the bill calls for level dollar funding, which means the money goes in to make up the difference, because that was the concern a lot of current and retired teachers have, is if new hires go away from the defined benefit to the hybrid cash balance, how's enough cash flow going to be put in the system? Well, it's because the state's going to be making up that difference. We're talking about an increase of again from 3.1 billion in this budget to a projected over 4 billion in the next budget, and that cycle would probably need to occur for about 30 years till everything cycles through. Yeah. So that would be the process.
Now, there's going to be a host of other issues on the agenda come January. This is, as you've alluded, this is a non-budget cycle. To deal with the budget, you'd have to have a supermajority.
Yes, sir.
To open that process up. What are some of the other issues, major issues, that are going to be before the legislature?
Well, I think you're going to see some cleanup stuff on the tax reform issue that we came about last year. Particularly in the area of charitable gaming, some things like that, where clearly some of the administrations, for example, finance, I think misinterpreted certainly the intent of the legislature on some of the charitable gaming and how they viewed that with the tax in there. So I think you'll see a cleanup bill to clarify a lot of those questions that are out there. I think that'll be one of the biggest things we do. Certainly going to see some issues around education in terms of possibly tribunal reform. That's out there somewhat. Senator Schickel has filed for several years a site-based counsel bill that's got a lot of attention. Many people think that his goal and the goal is to get rid of site-based counsels. That's not the goal. I think we want to have a healthy discussion on how can they be better. Currently, the makeup's 3 teachers, 2 parents. I think there's a lot of people who would like to have equal number of parents for the teachers. And then when it comes to principal selection, that's a big part of the discussion about superintendents having a little more say. Those are the sticking points. We, at least me personally, we don't want to get rid of. I've been on the site-based council, and I think they've got a valuable role. But I do think it's worthwhile to have that discussion about maybe having the same amount of parents that you do faculty members and those kind of things. So that'll be discussed somewhat. In the education arena, I think we're gonna have a healthy discussion on scholarship tax credits. I think that's an area that that people. I think a lot of people want some school choice issues. Obviously charters have been one of those. I think you'll see some possible movement on charters. It's looking more like you're probably going to see it maybe possibly a population cap. And maybe some of the more urban metropolitan areas would probably have a funding mechanism, and we may just leave some of the other districts up to a local option, whether they want to get creative and be flexible. That may be where that ends up at. It's too early to tell for sure, but so those are some of the education areas. There's some discussion around infrastructure reform, i.e., road funds and gas issues. I don't know that there's enough support for that right now, but there's certainly going to be a discussion about that, and that's one that obviously will have a lot of interest around here with Heartland Parkway and some other things. So.
Right. Now, on the question of budget and revenue, you mentioned this briefly, but I wanted to come back to it. What are the prospects through the biennium, current biennium, as far as revenue versus budget? You mentioned there was maybe a $25 million projected shortfall right now. I guess in the current year, or is that the current biennium?
That's the current biennium.
Okay.
Now, receipts have been really pretty positive. Of course, expenditures are increasing too, because if you follow the paper and you'll see, well, we're always talking about receipts have been up and economic growth has been decent, and from our perspective, we think that's due to some of the policies we put in, right to work and repeal of prevailing wage and some things like that have helped spur record investment in Kentucky. So when you hear receipts are up, but yet there's a little shortfall, people are probably thinking, well, how's that happen? Well, our expenditures are also up. I mean, when we're basically spending 90 cents on every dollar for, to educate, medicate, and incarcerate. Our Medicaid rolls are increasing, and unfortunately, obviously, our incarceration rates are so much higher. So while we're making more money and bringing in more receipts, obviously, it's taken a lot more to meet the needs, particularly in those three areas.
Speaking of Medicaid, Governor Bevin ran on and was elected in part on a platform of putting work requirements and some restrictions and reform related to Medicaid recipients that was challenged in the courts. And he's gone back to the drawing board and has come back with what appears to be a similar plan. What is the net effect of that plan, and will it save money?
Oh, it'll definitely save money, and I support the initiative. And it's not as if anybody, it don't matter what party you are, nobody in Frankfort or no elected official wants somebody who is in desperate need of service to not get it.
Sure.
But we also, many of us at least, don't see an issue with if you're an able-bodied person to go out and do some community service or make a contribution in order to receive that benefit. And we have to. Our workforce participation rate in the Commonwealth is 59%. And there's two big reasons, I think, that contribute to that. One is obviously our drug epidemic, and the second is, again, a culture that's been allowed to kind of grow, that it's okay to kind of depend on somebody else to take care of you instead of you. If you're an able-bodied person, you need to be making a contribution to society, and so until we do some welfare reform and criminal justice reform, unfortunately, we're concerned that we're not going to see much shift in that workforce participation rate.
Right.
And without that, it's really hard to grow your economy.
That is a major issue.
Major issue.
Around the state. It's a major issue right here in Taylor County.
Exactly.
Of finding enough able-bodied people to work.
So I'm very supportive of it. I hope, again, I'm sure it's going to be thrown through the courts again, and that's why we have checks and balances. Yes, but hopefully we can get to some agreement that, because most people who talk to me support that initiative. They want to. If it's somebody who can't help themselves, we want to make sure they're taken care of. But if you're an able-bodied person, again, there's no reason to receive those benefits that you can't, do some community service.
And isn't the federal funding for Medicaid being cut or reducing?
Yes, it is.
Over the long run.
Exactly. Our rate that we have to pay as a state is going to be increasing, which makes it even more necessary that we do something like this. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to afford it.
What other issues are facing the legislature when you go into session?
Well,
it's going to be interesting because it is a governor's race. It'll be a governor's race, and that's always kind of overtones from that spill over into what the legislature does to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to hear some more discussion about, do we continue moving on with more tax reform? I think you'll hear debate on it during the 30-day session, but it's unlikely that you really see action on it until maybe next year during the budget year, because something like that, it would probably be hard to get done in a 30-day session. So it's probably more likely to occur next year. I think, obviously, Attorney General Bashir sent out a letter last week or this week about he feels like basically one way to solve the pension issue is expanded gaming. So that's probably going to be discussed again. I don't see a lot of support, at least in the majority party of the House, for that issue. But there's a lot of folks saying, well, the courts have ruled on this. The athletics events and stuff like
sports.
that. So yeah, sports events. But bottom line is, reality, the numbers that I'm hearing there, it's on. You're looking at $20-some million. Well, that's not. That's not going to solve it.
There's a little bit of debate as to whether that can go ahead without some tweaking, at least of language, or statute, if not even a constitutional amendment. But I know they're planning to proceed with it.
There is a debate about that, but there is. I think it's in Oak Grove or down in that area. There's a situation like they're trying to do. So obviously that's going to be an issue that gets some attention this session. But tax reform, that issue, and would probably be the things that get most of the discussion. Again, 30-day session, a lot of new members on both sides of the aisle, particularly in the House. So I think you'll see just a lot of organizational things done, and probably action taken on only things that are really, really pressing.
You go in, we're about out of time. You go in the first week in January, then you break for, what, 3 weeks?
About 3 weeks.
And then go back in around the 1st of February.
That's correct.
For 30 days.
That's correct.
Bam, we're out of time. Let me congratulate you again on your reelection to your 6th term, and
Thank
also congratulate you on your new leadership responsibilities as the majority floor leader of the Republican caucus. Any closing comment?
Well, I just want to thank you and for what you do.
Well, you're
I want
very
to thank
welcome.
Campbellsville University for its presence here in the community and how they touch the lives of young people all across the Commonwealth. And I really appreciate your friendship and the support and what Campbellsville University does for this community.
You're very welcome. We appreciate that. This is John Channing with State Representative Bam Carney, thanking our audience for being with us for this segment of Dialogue on Public Issues.